Hey guys, Effie here. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. Today I'm going to make this card using our amazing Gardenia stamp set. I'm going to rose gold heat emboss this beautiful large image onto some watercolor paper. I'm using Canson XL 140-pound cold pressed watercolor paper. So I just inked up my stamp using some Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky embossing ink. And I'm also using my Martha Stewart stamp press or platform to stamp this large stamp onto my full-size watercolor paper. Now the reason why I'm not using a MISTI is because I didn't feel like dragging out my 12 by 12 MISTI, and to stamp this large watercolor paper without trimming it down beforehand, I had to use kind of a standalone platform. After I gold heat embossed this image, I just use a cornating die to die cut the image. For today's Mother's Day card, I'm also going to use our beautiful branches stamp set. So there are two images in that 3x4 set, and it's just going to make my floral arrangement a little bit more fuller. Before I start stamping this set, I'm going to do a little bit of cutting with my Cricut machine. So the file that you purchase from our site, it actually comes with two digital files. This first file that I'm cutting, it has a rectangle surrounding the actual coordinating cut shape. And this is the placement guide cut file. Since I'm cutting this out of watercolor paper, I'm actually going to run it through my Cricut a second time. So instead of pressing that blinking arrow button, I'm going to go ahead and click the Cricut button. So the machine is going to cut exactly in the same place that it did during that first run. But if you unload it and then reload it to cut it again, you might have some offset issues. So you want to make sure that you don't unload your mat if you want to cut your image a second time. Once my cutting was complete for the second time, I unloaded my Cricut mat and then carefully peeled away the placement guides and the inner negative pieces, which I can actually use for my project. I placed the placement guides inside my regular size original MISTI and I held them down with magnets. Then I took the two image stamps from our beautiful branches set and placed them so that they coordinate with the inner negative cut piece. Once I picked up the stamps with the door of the MISTI, I put some of the cut images into the inner negative piece, and then I went ahead and gold heat embossed the two pieces. Now this is a great method if you want to emboss multiple pieces in one sitting. I tried to do this without those placement guides, and it's kind of a pain in the butt when you don't have the guides. And also when you use these placement guides, if you leave the stamps on your MISTI door, you can emboss or stamp them as many times as you want without moving the stamp. So this is really a convenient system to use since we don't have coordinating dies for this set. For this card, I need 3 of the floral branches and 4 of the smaller branches. So I'm going to go ahead and emboss some additional pieces, and you can see here that it's easy for me to just emboss these images over and over again because of my placement system. I don't have to go back and forth to unpeel the stamps and place them. So this system is a real time saver. Once my embossing was complete, here you can see all my cut and emboss pieces. I'm just going to put them to the side except for the Gardenia because that is the one I'm going to start watercoloring. I'm going to use some Peony color bursts to watercolor the petals, and I'll be using a wet and wet watercoloring technique. I'm using a medium Pentel water brush to wet the inner areas of my Gardenia with clean water, and then I took my fine tip Pentel water brush to add some of the Peony pigment into the center of my Gardenia. So after I dropped in a little bit of the pigment, I'm just going to blend the color out to the outer edges of the petal. And I'm going to repeat this process for each petal in this Gardenia. I'm going to work petal by petal for this Gardenia since it's a rather large image. You can see me go back and forth within one petal as I'm working because I go back to add deeper concentrations of the color burst pigment to the inner areas of the petal. If you're feeling a little adventurous at this point, you can add a second color to your gardenia. But since my project today is a little busy with the beautiful branches, I wanted to keep the color to a minimum for my gardenia. So I just stuck with the one peony color burst. I'm just switching off between my fine tip brush and my medium tip brush here. You can see that my medium tip brush, generally it stays clean, and I want to make sure that it stays clean when I'm blending the peony color burst out to the edges of my petal. And to do so, I have a clean paper towel right next to my workstation, which I use to brush off the pigment or wipe off the pigment from the brush tip. I also use that paper towel to help control the amount of moisture on both brush tips. Sometimes there's a little bit too much water that comes out of the barrels, and it either floods the brush tip so that it dilutes the pigment that's on there a little too much, so then I'll just dab it onto my paper towel to lessen the amount of water on the brush so that my colors are deeper and richer. However, if you're going for that softer muted look, you want to make sure that your brush has enough water to dilute the color burst pigment, because again, these pigments are very, very rich. You only need a little bit. A little bit goes a long way. So once I finish coloring in the petals of my gardenia, I'm going to color in the leaves using some sap green color bursts. And for these leaves, I'm not using the wet and wet technique because the surface area of the leaves are just kind of small, and you can just add your sap green color burst and then blend the color out to the edges, and my gardenia is complete. Next, I'm going to start watercoloring the branches from our beautiful branches. I'll start with the larger one. So I wet the entire area with some clean water, and then I took my fine tip brush, dipped it into my orchid color burst, and then dropped some pigment into the centers of the flowers in this branch. After I dropped in the pigment, I took my larger water brush and I blended that color out to fill the rest of the flower with this beautiful orchid or purple color. And here I'm just working very quickly to color in the entire branch. Once I finish coloring with the orchid, I'm going to go ahead and add a second color to these blooms. I'm going to use some indigo color bursts. For the indigo color bursts, you want to make sure that you only add them to a few petals on each floral, because I don't want the indigo to overpower that orchid. I kind of just want a two-tone look. So I'm just going to add them to about 2 petals per floral. You get more of a jewel tone look when you use 2 tones, and you can clearly see the 2 hues. You have this beautiful orchid with a hint of indigo in some of the other petals, and I really love the look and the result of this technique. Next, I just colored in the leaves with some sap green color bursts. After I went in with the one layer of sap green, I actually added tiny bits of Prussian blue to the inner or bottom portions of the leaves to give them a little bit more of a shaded or shadow effect. And I'm not really sure why I did this for such a small image, but I think I was a little bored at this point. I just decided to go for it. But I think in the future I might leave that second shade out because it's so small. So once I finished with the floral branch, I just went ahead and watercolored the smaller branch with some, I think this is Prussian blue color burst, and I added deeper concentration to the inner portions of those buds and colored in the leaves with sap green. Now my watercoloring is complete. So I'm going to start assembling my card. I have this beautiful green cardstock. It's a little longer than A2. It's 6 inches by 4¼ inches. And then this white panel, which I adhered onto the green panel, is about 4 by 2½ inches. Now I'm going to start popping up all my floral elements. For the 2 branches that are on the bottom of the amazing gardenia, I actually cut off the bottom portion of the branches because they were kind of getting in the way of each other. But make sure you save these pieces because I end up fussy cutting some of the florals from here and I reuse them on my project because I really don't like to waste pieces, especially watercolor pieces, because all the work is done. So if you can crop out any of excess pieces on this kind of stuff and reuse them, go for it because you can only add to your project. Next, I white heat embossed this Mother's Day sentiment from our mini holiday sentiment set. I'll link it in our description box below. And then I popped up my finished panel onto a top folding base. Next, I finished off my card by adding some gold medallion sequins. We have a nice complete mix of these gold sequins. We have 10, 8, 6, 5, and 4 millimeters. So I use a range of all of them. I even tuck some of the larger sequins behind my watercolored floral cuts, and it kind of gives it more of a metallic look, but it's subtle, and I really love the finished result. I hope you guys enjoyed today's project and video. Be sure to stop by our blog today because we have a surprise digital release, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel because I update it on a regular basis. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.